For us to have a former leader in a federal enforcement agency sitting with us talking about cannabis, this is remarkable. Welcome to another episode of Cultivate. This is a show about you and your journey in the cannabis industry. It's moving fast, but there's room for everyone. Buckle up as we bring you the people and the technology that are blazing the trail. I'm Drew Emmer, and this is
Scott. We are live at MJBIZ Vegas 2019. It's been an epic show so far.
I'm excited about our guest in this episode, Charles Feldmann. Welcome to Cultivate. Happy to have you here. This guy's resume, or curriculum vitae, as it were, reads like the who's who. I mean, you're a named founder of a law firm in Colorado. You're a United States Marine. You're active in the cannabis industry, representing and advocating for and defending a broad variety of people globally. Super active in the wildlife defense area, military justice. You come to us, a connection that we made through the industry as the principal of Gateway Proven Strategies. Welcome to Cultivate.
Thank you.
And thanks for taking the time.
It's a pleasure to be here. It really is.
Yeah, it's really, I've got a lot of questions. Scott's got a lot of questions. I mean, one of the most fascinating things, we'll get a zoom at some point on the lapel pin that Charles has on, the DEA badge. And for us to have a former leader in a federal enforcement agency sitting with us talking about cannabis, this is remarkable. So can you talk about
cool.
how you crossed the chasm and became an advocate for cannabis after being so active in leadership on the side of the DEA?
Yeah, I'd love to. I started my career, as you mentioned, as a United States Marine. I went through law school through the Marine Corps. Did a couple tours with the Marine Corps and ended up, I think, either defending or prosecuting about every crime known to mankind. So it was a very holistic experience. I did a lot of Southern California narcotics prosecutions, some of the bigger busts that we had done. This was kind of back in the 90s. As this kind of warrior mentality, I just was all about service. I believed in the mission. And then after my active duty service, I came back to Colorado, where I was from. And I was a commander for a DEA drug task force in Colorado, and really engaged in the war on drugs as kind of that foot soldier, like right at the front lines. I was in charge of our task force. I was in charge of the strategy and all the federal logistics that went with that. And then prosecuting all the crimes that, we came out of that. So I really got a wide variety of experience coming from the law enforcement side of what our war on drugs was like. And I also, kind of what I talk about now, is I got a really good taste of the propaganda machine that I learned about from our federal government. And that was new to me. I think I really lost some of the faith as that frontline soldier. The more that we were engaged in the war on drugs, you began to see that there were legitimately some people who should be prosecuted using our criminal justice system. They were abusing children. They were, some pretty horrific, extreme cases that I think all of us would get behind. But honestly, the vast majority of the bullshit that we did was really focused on sort of our cultural background, that we had demonized certain social decisions, and it had become a corporate big business for government, for job security.
So let's go off on we're going to go off on tangents. This is going to be a fast moving interview. It's just, I got so many questions to ask you. If you just focus on the political conversation in our country and how it's changed over the course of time that you've been involved in it, what is the political conversation today, and where's the hopeful outcomes? Where we're sitting in the MJBIZ convention in Las Vegas, the largest convention in the cannabis industry, there's a lot of people with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears invested in developing this business. And where's the hope for tomorrow? And where are we going? And what are we doing, or what are we failing to do right now to promote the cause?
That's a great question. I look back for so long, I felt like I was the only sort of federal agent who, kind of coming from that background, the military, the law enforcement side, who had crossed over. I've been now an active cannabis advisor for over a decade now.
Sorry to interrupt, did you catch a lot of backlash?
I did.
For that transition?
Yeah, I absolutely did. There was this mindset of going over to the dark side, of now you're kind of a traitor to the cause. Which is interesting. That was 10 years ago. Today, I get a lot of peers who are retiring saying, hey, Charles, how do I get into this business? Wow, this is exciting. And I'm kind of like, yeah.
Well, that's the pain of leadership. When you're the guy that takes the risk, and takes on the challenge and goes out there, you do take flack. I mean, you do end up taking
anybody who's moving a social norm or creating a new industry is always going to have arrows in their back, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So to me, I see that change just in my own personal experience of the acceptance coming out of government, of the inevitability of where this is going federally and legalization. And, I think there's real social movement of not wanting government to tell us, as Americans, we're very traditional and don't tell us what to think.
Right.
And two, I think there's really what I've been a part of is don't tell us what sort of medicine we can put in our bodies or what our doctors should be able to prescribe for us. Government should not be in that business. And that has moved us forward. I mean, very aggressively forward to even now at GPS Global. I mean, I'm traveling the world, speaking around the world because everybody wants in this U.S. marketplace. Everybody does. And they're trying to figure it out, and they want to know when is this federal change going to happen and how is that going to happen?
Do you have a guess on when that will happen?
I love usually when I speak, I ask everybody in the room to be like, what do you think? And, it's anywhere from tomorrow to, 10 years out. I think it's so hard in our country right now with politics, even with the banking bill next year. I'm still 50-50 on that just because of impeachment and politics and election year. It's so hard, even when government agrees, for them to get anything done.
Yeah.
So I really struggle with when that happens. But I do see the hemp, the farm bill as a way for the federal government to move this forward, to slowly, methodically, which is what government likes to do, not all of a sudden. In the Canada model, they'll never do it in a year like they did. But you see those slow chipping away that progress. So I'm hopeful we'll see real change in the next few years.
So jumping back a little bit, so you retire from being a DEA commander. Then where did that leap come into the cannabis space?
I started my own law firm like 15 years ago, went into private practice. I felt like I'd done enough government service by then, was ready for doing my own thing. We had our first cannabis client about 10 years ago who was entering Colorado's big social experiment as medical and then recreational happened. Was a high net worth, very sophisticated individual. And they really wanted back then, people were still going to jail. There was still this threat from the DEA and federal prosecutions. So high net worth individuals wanted to know and understand that landscape before just jumping in.
Yeah.
And that's how I got my start and really was able to grow and advise everywhere from the mom and pop, startup to now, gazillion dollar multinational tobacco and beverage companies. I mean, again, I'm with you. It's so exciting right now to see the world of cannabis and marijuana and hemp.
So before we forget, if someone wants to engage you in conversation or to speak or as a potential client, how would they reach you? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
GPS.global. That's the easiest way to grab me. And again, I love talking about this, thinking about it, building strategy, really navigating. And it's fun now to see how much the industry has evolved and grown up and where it's moving towards, moving from a movement to a true industry.
Yeah.
And to be a part of that, as a business professional and a counselor and building strategy, it's a great job right now. I mean, I'm thoroughly loving it.
We've had an experience of working a lot of shows over the years together, and I would say, and correct me if you think this is inaccurate, but we've had a lot of people early on in the process. There was a real stoner mentality in the cannabis industry. And if you walk through this show today, or if you even go to the local dispensaries and experience the way that products are being merchandised and the way things are being presented.
Well, the was it Apothecary that we went to, and all the bud tenders were wearing sport coats and dressed up and had ties on. I walked in, I'm like, wait, we're
it's
in
like
a
walking into
dispensary?
an iPhone store. It's like we've seen a separation between, and this is no slam to the stoner community. I mean, we're all freedom-loving people. We'd like to see everyone have the chance to make the decisions that they want to make for themselves personally. But the stoner mentality has really diminished. Have you noticed that? I mean, you're not
Absolutely.
a guy that I think anybody would we can ask you deeply personal questions about personal use or any of that, but you're not a guy that I would identify with the movement from where we started.
Yeah. I would think back to like the Champ show that we did in Atlantic City in 2016. Looking back at that show and then looking here, it's like, this is not even the
This
same
is like
industry.
Fortune 500. This is like walking into and I used to come here for the Consumer Electronics Show for years. We participated in Comdex and different things, and this has a feel of that. I mean, it is professional. It is sophisticated. I mean, what are your? I mean, you've walked through this when it was more stoner culture, and now it's become so professional. What do you think about that?
I think you're spot on. I mean, I remember the first MJBIZ conference and exactly what you described, what it was to this, today. It's such a different level. And it's where I talk with clients all day long on the level of sophistication and business acumen has just exponentially increased. So the days when you could just get a license and, you knew how to grow in your basement and you get like, those days have come and gone. Like, you just continue to see consolidation and commoditization, and it really is becoming a legitimate industry. And whether it's a state, a national, or even where I see it as a global supply chain kind of industry, you really got to be sophisticated. You got to know what you're doing. You got to know what a business plan is and how to put that together. Investors, we guide a lot of capital these days. Those days of crazy Canadian valuations, that is gone. Like, you got to have real revenues. You got to know what you're doing, So
you can't throw a marijuana leaf and green whatever.
No,
and
you can't just have a cool brand or a cool idea or, just because you got the next greatest vape pen. I mean, there's 400 vape pens in the market. Like, and the best isn't necessarily what's going to be, the outlast everyone else.
Right.
Okay, so you brought up vape pens. I have to ask you. I got a black helicopter syndrome that exists in my own consciousness. I listened to the news on a specific day a couple months ago. Everybody, same talking points, attacking the vaping industry, the whole vitamin E acetate, blah, blah, blah. A sliver of a really important industry gets identified as being in trouble because they're doing something incorrectly and it's dangerous. But then the conflation is the entire vaping industry gets lumped in, and it felt like such a hit job. I mean, am I fantasizing?
No, I think you're right on.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So from your perspective, can you talk about the powers that be in terms of the tobacco industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the people that don't want to necessarily see
succeed
these companies thrive that are in this room?
I kind of have a different perspective on that. I think those big industries do want it to succeed because they're going to participate in it. There, I think, are some real strategies, and I know just because I'm involved in several of those, for them to figure out their place in that. The CBD infused beverage market is a great one to start, where that starts, and then that moves into, an actual THC kind of beverage and mixing alcohol and and high.
Well, and the Constellation Brands CEO just took over as the head of one of the major LPs in Canada.
Right?
Canopy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do see that sort of big box, whether it's pharma, tobacco, whatever that's going to be. I do see their involvement in it. I don't think it's completely decided yet how that develops, how that evolves. But I do agree with you on the vape. It's a great example of, especially where I focus on this unregulated, illegal, that marketplace is alive and well, and how that really affects the legitimate, people who've invested so much time and energy into bringing this out of the shadows into a true business environment. That illegal marketplace still has a cause and effect, that those bad vape pens, which I really think is a lot what that was, is unregulated black market.
That was my interpretation of the whole deal. The people that got sick or hurt from these vape pens were getting them off the black market. They weren't coming from the legal market.
Right.
I know
legitimate players.
It takes me right back to DEA days. Most of the time, people weren't hurt from cocaine. They were hurt from what it was cut with.
Yeah.
So all the other, shit that people would put into that is the same thing we saw in these vape pens, cutting it with stuff that just should never have been in there, and that legitimate business doesn't put in their product.
Right.
So I look at the enforcement side of things as everybody's just following orders. Back in the day of the days of the war on drugs, it was just really basic for somebody that's on duty, that's on the job. They need to obey the orders that they've been giving. It's the vision of what you're supposed to be doing. Everybody's just doing their job, right? So now I look at the news lately. There were a number of seizures of hemp because the drug enforcement people were unable to differentiate between hemp and cannabis, and there was a lot of just a lot of risk and a lot of loss that people incurred because feds or state enforcement agents had taken over shipments of hemp. Is there a way to resolve that? Is there do you anticipate that there's going to be better tactics for people to use in terms of enforcement?
I do. I think it's a great place where technology, plays a role. The DEA put out a bulletin last year looking for some sort of, you go use the alcohol example, some sort of roadside machine that would help them decide, is this marijuana or is this truckload of legal farm bill hemp?
Yeah.
And so they're looking for that. They don't
Does
have
that technology exist yet?
Yes and no. I think there's some really good companies who are moving in that direction. It's not wholesale on the market yet. But again, man, whoever solves that problem, they got a great little IP and product, because they actively want to buy.
Does the technology exist yet in to ascertain whether or not I'm legal to drive?
Well, that'll be a whole nother topic. The alcohol industry went from, hey, are you competent to drive your car because you had a beer, to a number. Hey, it doesn't matter whether you're a good drunk driver or not. If you're over this blood alcohol content, that's a crime.
Yeah.
So marijuana, THC, we haven't had that science yet. We haven't had the decades to figure that out. So we're still a lot in that. There's no direct comparison to the 0.10 or 0.08 because it has a different effect on the body. So again, we'll get there. I mean, and law enforcement, back to your question, we continually try to have the mindset, we didn't make policy. We were there to enforce it. And that got tougher and tougher to do. And really, for me personally, I saw that just really wasn't the case. Law enforcement has an enormous amount of discretion. And you get pulled over, that patrol officer, that state patrol, they have an enormous amount of discretion on whether you're going to get a warning or whether they're going to, tag you with every violation they can come up with legitimately. So I, again, saw that even more so in the war on drugs, where, a lot of what I believed or had been taught just was not true. It wasn't accurate. And just incarcerating people who had made different social choices than maybe I had done as a young Marine. That wasn't a good use of our criminal justice system. And that's really what pushed me that other way.
So I'm curious, you're a Colorado resident. That's where your
Yes, sir.
business is based. everybody that I talk to, there's two sets of talking points. There's the set of talking points where the impact of cannabis normalization in Colorado has been a boon to the school system, to just the amount of money that's come into the state and the overall welfare of the people in the state. Great contribution. The opposite of that is also a set of talking points that I hear regularly about, there's all sorts of deleterious effects that have come forward because of the way things changed in Colorado. As a Colorado resident and as a guy that's got his face right up to the windshield of this industry, can you give me your opinion about, or give us your opinion about, what is the social impact, the commercial impact, the societal impact of the normalization of cannabis, and as Colorado as a model?
Yeah.
And if there's any negative effects that you've seen.
Yeah, there are both. So I mean, early on I spoke a lot as state by state was moving into that either medical or recreational, and I would meet with law enforcement. And we would talk about, hey, the world didn't end in Colorado because we legalized marijuana. It really was okay. And there were mistakes made. Colorado made a ton of mistakes because there was no one else out there figuring it out. So yeah, there are some social impact to any new drug that you introduce, that you legalize. So I think anybody, I would call them more on the activist side, who are like, oh, there's never a negative side. I'm like, that's just not true. I mean, it's just not. And I think we shouldn't hide from that fact or be embarrassed by that fact that, yeah, there are social changes for this 70 years of prohibition that we've had. I think in Colorado, though, most of the citizens would tell you overwhelmingly, it's been a positive experiment. I mean, there has been, $1 billion of tax revenue that we didn't have. I mean, think about that. For a small 5 million person state, that's small.
A ton of money.
That's a lot of money that government has had available to build new schools, hire new teachers, and have actually done that. So I think as not even involved in the industry, just walking the street, I do smell marijuana in Colorado a lot, and I've gotten used to that. Now I miss it. When I get off the plane and come home, I'm like, oh, I'm home, because there's that fragrance there.
Yeah.
That sort of a socialization that has changed to where it's accepted. I think for me, the biggest thing is seeing my parents, my 70-year-old parents, change their perspective, coming from a very conservative, religious law enforcement side to being like, hey, this really is medicine, and it can really help people.
How do you respond to people when they talk about the homeless situation? We get a lot of feedback from our experience in California, where there's a really severe, very obvious problem with people sleeping outdoors.
Yeah.
Is there an opinion that you can share about where we are in this regard in terms of the impact of cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, Colorado's a great example. I think that is one of the negative social ills that we've had from this industrialization of it. Is we do have, you can't deny it, a greater homeless population. There's been more of a draw because it's this recreational state. But again, I think that is a social problem. It is a social issue that we have to solve using those particular tools, and that's government, private industry, not-for-profits. What it's not is a criminal justice issue. And we as Americans, all too often, coming from that, it's easy for us to try to solve problems with that big hammer.
Right.
And that's what criminal justice is. It has its place in society. You need the big hammer there are some real monsters out there. But I got to tell you, I mean, in my opinion, 90% of what's in the criminal justice system should be somewhere else. That hammer is just really not a solution.
Right.
We're thrilled to have you on our podcast.
Oh, thanks
This
so
is
much.
interesting.
Awesome
I
guest.
could just
we
sit
could
here
go
and
on for
listen.
another hour, but I want to invite you back. We could
Love to.
work on some curriculum, come up on some things. Boveda is not anybody's star of anybody's show. We're an asterisk on the whole industry as far as our desire to be involved in keeping cannabis at a certain quality level.
Yeah.
So a big part of what we bring to the table is our passion and our desire to edify others and to support the industry and moving forward. And doing the right thing and being persistent and finding a way to stand behind this movement and really be a part of pushing it forward. So we're grateful for you coming and joining us on the podcast today. Really cool to meet you. I mean, fascinating to be with a guy who's a named principal and a founder of his own law firm, a lengthy service career with the United States Marine Corps. Just the position you have in the cannabis industry, coming from where you came from, it gives us an opportunity to share with people that may have more interest in listening to you and your opinions than they do to a lot of the talking points that we see in the news. So thanks so much for being
thank you
with
for
us
having
today.
me.
And thank you
Real
for your
pleasure.
service, law enforcement
Thank
and
you.
military.
Yeah,
thank
Charles
you.
Feldmann.